From the Asgard Company Studios in beautiful Wichita Falls, Texas, from the finest mind in the modern fitness industry, the one true voice in the strength and conditioning profession, the most important podcast on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, starting Strength Radio. Welcome back to Starting Strength Radio. We're glad you're here with us this week. We have our guest in the studio today, Blake Wilson from Dominion Strength, the guys who make Starting Strength belts. And we're going to have a long, detailed, boring, horrible discussion with him about belt manufacture and leather and everything that you want to know. And as usual, we start with comments from the haters. This week, we have a particularly lovely crop of comments from the haters. Most of this, I think, is from the Stan Efferding video that ran a while back. And we got, let's see, Eric Miranda says, I'm not an expert, but after analyzing this video and all the contents, I cannot say anything because, as I said in the beginning, I'm not an expert. Thanks. This is the most sensible comment that I have ever read in YouTube comments anywhere, anytime, about anything. So really, he's not a hater, is he? Okay, here's one. Nick Baker says, both of them have lobster hands. For some reason, they have the inability to move their 4 index fingers separately. You hear that? 4 index fingers separately. And are only able to make a pincer-like movement with their thumbs. Rip wins on the lobster look-alike scale, though, since his hands and forearms look like they came out of a Soviet nuclear power plant, but his upper body is like a 98-year-old overweight grandma. Oh, God. Here, Nick. Okay. Angel of Cake says, I don't think Mark has lifted for 20 years. He looks like he has the nice, soft hands of an office worker who moistures a lot. Now, that's the first time I've ever heard that I had soft hands. Angel, sweetheart, I can caress you and show you that they're not soft. Come see me, okay? And Audio Ventura says, now this is a good one, all right? I love this. I only have the utmost respect for both Stan and Rip, but why in the hell would order this, whatever it is, it's not food, mash stuff? If you have problems with calories, just make a sauce hollandaise with your steak. That ought to do it. Don't know if this is an American thing, but as a half French, half German, I would never even think about ordering, let alone eating something like this. It's utterly cultureless, if this word exists. Oh, shit. The bottom 3%. Comments from the haters. Now, Blake, thank you for coming from where in the hell ever it is that you live in Florida.
Edgewater, Florida.
And
right there where Dorian just tried to come through and wipe us out.
Did you watch that or what?
Well, we had several different plans depending on what was going to happen. It looked like we might get hit directly by a Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane.
Yeah, it
so
could have happened.
we had plans to leave Florida. We had plans to possibly hole up at the shop, which is a few miles off the coast. We ended up the day that it would have made landfall had it done so. We went west over to now I'm going to forget the name. What's the name of that? Lakeland.
Lakeland. I've heard of Lakeland, Florida.
Yeah, it's
I don't
just
know
over on
why
the west
I haven't.
coast.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what we ended up doing. But we got lucky.
Right.
We dodged a bullet on that. We didn't
Well,
have any.
you did.
Yeah.
Is the shop reinforced for hurricanes?
I don't know that it's reinforced. It's
Well,
built to withstand.
Why don't you reinforce it, Blake, you bonehead? I mean, it's Florida. There's hurricanes.
Well, I'm a renter, so.
Oh, I see. It's not yours.
I was told it was rated to 140 miles an hour. So all we did, we got 3
like-
roll-up doors there.
That sounds like bullshit.
2 of them are east-facing, so we barricaded those.
Right.
Because that would be the worst-case scenario. I thought would be to have a door blow in and then
Oh, God.
have days and days.
All
and
that
days.
inventory screwed up.
That all got pushed into the middle of the shop and tarps over everything and all over
Up
all
off
the
the
equipment.
floor and everything.
Everything up off the floor.
Right.
Yeah. So we prepared as good as we thought we could, and then
Well,
ended up
good.
getting lucky.
We're all happy that you didn't get blown around and flooded and wet and everything. So, Blake, tell us about how long you've been in the weightlifting belt business and how you got into it.
Well, I got to say this is pretty much all your fault.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know anything about weightlifting belts until I heard a podcast with you on it. At the time, I was doing CrossFit, and I realized I did not have the same motor that some of those people do to do Metcons and stuff like that. But people that could, whoop me pretty handily at that, I could be stronger than them when we do the weight training
Right.
portion of the
Once every 6
workout.
weeks when they squat.
Right.
You were stellar at that.
I don't know that I was stellar, but I realized maybe there'd be some room to specialize in that as opposed to getting into Metcons and everything. So, but continuing to do CrossFit then is not really ideal because I just wanted to lift weights. I don't care about all the extra cardio and everything. So I started poking around and actually found you randomly, I think, on Mike Matthews' podcast. I know you had him on a couple times.
We just had Mike on recently here on our actual podcast. I've done several audio only Skype podcasts with Mike. In fact, I'm going to do another one next month. And he and I have gotten to be buddies. And you probably heard the one about back injuries, I bet. No, that was kind of recent. Couldn't have been that. I wonder.
No, it was probably 3-ish years ago.
Might have been.
When I heard this.
Might have been our first one we did.
Yeah, but it was the first time I'd heard of starting strength and heard of Mark Rippetoe, and I was like, all right, well, this guy's at least funny as hell to listen to. Let me see what else he talks about. And so I went down the rabbit hole of the Starting Strength podcast. At the time, you had done. We were actually living. Katie and I. Katie's over there for moral support. Say hey, Katie.
Hey.
We were living in Decatur, and there was a Starting Strength affiliate gym there that we found out about through your podcast.
Decatur, Georgia.
Right. Yeah. And going there, getting some, proper coaching, going through an LP, we pretty quickly realized, we need a belt, after several weeks into this. And so we started asking around, who makes good belts? Where do you buy these things? Of course, there's a bunch on Amazon, but you kind of assume
that's all junk.
Those are overseas pieces of junk. So the names we would get, we would look at these companies and say, well, if you're going to get a nice belt, it's going to be made to order. It's going to take you 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that to get it.
Right.
Why isn't there just an option where you can buy a good belt now? Maybe there's limited options, one color, something like that. And, my background is in mechanical engineering. I was working for an engineering company at the time, and I would source a lot of different products just in my everyday job. So I thought, well, heck, maybe I could come up with something that could be sourced. Maybe it could be made cheaply enough that we could sell them. At the very least, maybe we can get one made for ourselves. And the gears started turning. There's a lot of steps from here to there. That was, I guess, right about 3 years ago now.
Right.
That all that started, and we started getting samples in and everything, and one thing led to another, and now we're making the belts ourselves down at our own shop in Edgewater, Florida.
Right.
So,
well, I think you probably talked to our buddy Dean Best.
mm-hmm.
Dean makes a damn good belt. He and I have talked about this quite a bit, and he's just backed up. If you want a suede belt, I always recommend Dean. He does a great job, has a fabulous product. I know that you've talked to Dean several times, and you guys are on good terms and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing is a completely different thing. Dean it takes a while to get product out of him. He's a small shop, and does things his own way and makes a real high quality product. But there's a market for something that's got a little faster turnaround time than that. And you guys have stepped up and filled this hole in the market quite handily. And the finished product is laying here on the table. This is the 2-ply starting strength belt. This thing retails for $175. And how long does it take you to get this order filled?
We'll ship all of our orders out within a week. Ship them within a week, and in the U.S., you'll get it in 2 to 3 days. Priority mail doesn't take any time. So from the time you place the order, you're looking at less than 2 weeks.
Should be no longer than 10 days.
Yeah,
really.
10 days, you'll have it in your hands.
Right.
And a lot of these, now that we know what sells the best, we'll keep a lot of those in stock. So there's plenty of people that'll order a belt. It'll go out the next day.
Right.
Or even the same day.
If it's not an oddball.
Right.
But the starting strength belt, there's just two versions of it. The one you see on the table here is the 2-ply belt, and we're going to talk more about this in detail in a minute. And we're going to talk about leather and how these are made, and what they're made of, and how leather is sourced, and all this stuff. But this is the single-ply version of the starting strength belt. This is a lot cheaper. This is a lot lower price point. This is what, 85?
I think we got it for 90.
90. Mm-hmm. And again, this is a top quality product. If you'll look at the rivets, they're nice big fat rivets that do not come loose. Anytime you see a belt with little bitty teeny ballpoint pen size rivets.
Yeah, these are industrial rivets. They have a tension and a shear rating that'll never be tested on one of these belts.
And the little ones pull out.
Yeah.
They always pull out. You will not use one of those belts for any length of time and the thing not destroy itself. So these are some of the features of the starting strength belt. This is a 2-ply, and once it breaks in, it's very, very comfortable. It's tight, provides a lot of hoop tension. And those of you that have read my article about the belt and the deadlift understand how the belt works. If you haven't read it, you'll save yourself some time. Just stop the podcast right now. Just push the little button in the middle. Go read the article, and then come back, and we'll wait on you. Welcome back. Now, these things are going to do what a belt is supposed to do. They do it nicely. They do it with class. They're beautiful pieces of workmanship. And let's talk about what goes into these two things, all right? Let's talk about the easy one first. What is this single-ply belt made out of?
This is made out of a type of top grain leather called sole leather, and it's cut from the bend, which is a section of the hide that runs along the backbone of the animal. I guess first, maybe the best thing to do would be back up and talk about
talk about the grades of leather. And this is a top grain.
This is a top grain. So you can think of the cowhide as basically 3 separate layers. So the outermost layer is called the full grain, and that's got all of the imperfections.
So you've got a cross section of hide, maybe this thick.
Yeah, maybe an inch thick, maybe a little more, a little less.
Really, an inch thick.
Yeah.
The hide on the back of a steer, especially on the back of a bull, is very, very thick. It's that way for protection from the elements, from fights, from ornery creatures jumping on his back in the middle of Africa, that sort of thing.
Right.
And people are surprised at how thick leather is, how thick the section of a hide is that comes off an animal. And it's very, very thick. And it's thickest along the spine at the shoulders. Mm-hmm. That's where it's thickest. Yeah. In fact, if you'll remember, back from your history lessons, the Indians used to make buffalo rawhide shields. Remember this, little target-sized shields out of the shoulder hide of a buffalo. Mm-hmm. And when those things they would cut those things to shape from that piece of hide, and they would dry them, and they'd shrink and contract, and you had a piece of material that was 1.5 inches thick that would turn a bullet if you were clever enough to get it in the way.
That's the trick.
That's the trick. Putting it between you and the bullet.
Yeah.
So people aren't familiar with how thick that hide is. But so the first layer is called.
That's the full grain.
The full grain.
Yeah, so the tannery's going to get the hide in, and they're going to first split that full grain layer off, and they're going to take a look at it. If it's a really high grade, so there's not a lot of imperfections, defects, it's just got a nice natural grain, or they can tell that it will have a nice natural grain after the tanning process, it'll go on and just become something usually called like aniline leather or something like that. It's going to be like the highest end couches, handbags, stuff like that are made from that full grain leather.
And this is where they want to show the texture of the
they want that actual
the
leather
pores
grain.
And the obvious surface features that are on a piece of linen. This is called full grain.
Full grain.
So if you see full grain cowhide, this is the top layer of the skin.
Right. And the times where they just take it and put, a transparent dye or something like that, it's very rare. I've read that only a few percent of hides, like maybe about 3% of all hides, can be done in that manner, just because there's so many imperfections that you'll have in a hide.
And what are imperfections? Scratches from fights and holes.
Scratches, warts, scars, branding marks, even just
pleasantries.
Yeah, even just damage that happened to it after it was taken off the animal, just in transport and everything. So that's the top grain leather. Now, something about the top grain leather and the next layer, the full grain and the top grain, which is the next layer down, is they have the same, I guess you'd call it fiber structure. Mm-hmm. So both of these layers have fibers that are very densely packed, very tightly woven together, and they make a very durable product as a result. So it's something that's not going to wear out and break over time. It's going to wear in and just develop character and things like that. There's one more layer down that after the full grain is split off, after the top grain is split off, you have something that's just called split leather. And this is down the hide far enough so that those fibers are no longer as densely packed. Mm-hmm. They're both further apart and less intertwined. So you've got something that is very flexible, but is not going to have near the durability that a top grain product is going to have. So they take the split leather and they make suede out of it, garment, upholstery type stuff.
So it's inherently more flexible.
Inherently more flexible, but for a weightlifting belt, not really the material you'd want to use.
Right, because it's also, in addition to being flexible this way, it's also stretchy.
Right.
And when we wear a belt, we wear it for the specific purpose of not yielding to pressure.
Yeah, the only thing I haven't done is, send a sample off to a lab and have them do like an instron pull test of a cross section of this versus a cross section of the split to see what that tensile strain would be for a given load. Just from holding pieces in your hands and moving them, it's got to be an order of magnitude at least, because this stuff is not noticeable, but a split you can stretch.
Right. So to recap, we have full grain, which is when you want the visual effect of the pores and the surface features of a natural hide.
Right.
Then you have the top grain, which is the same structural density as the full grain, but with a smooth, even finish like this because it's a cut.
Right.
From
yeah,
out of
there's
the
been a
hide.
layer split off of that.
Layer
yeah.
taken off, and then you have the split, which is the flimsy stuff that we're not interested in for belts.
Right. Which is not to say people don't use it on belts. And a lot of those cheap belts that you'd find on Amazon or coming from overseas, they make them out of that split leather because it's cheap.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's very inexpensive. And it'd probably work for a month or so.
Yeah, it might, or until you got up to 135.
Yeah.
You know. And I wonder if perhaps split leather was the reason that people started making belts in 2 and 3 ply. I don't know.
Be.
It just occurs to me that maybe that was their answer for having to use cheap materials to make a belt out of.
There are definitely belts that do that. Like one of our belts we have is it has this same piece of leather on the inside and then suede on both sides, just a standard double suede belt.
Right.
And we don't put any edge paint on it or anything. We like to see that nice leather edge and stuff. Other manufacturers will take a piece of split leather, substitute it in for the top grain, put the suede on it, edge paint it, and then they'll go in and dye the holes and inside the buckle area brown so that you wouldn't know, or unless you cut
Really?
into it, you wouldn't know that you didn't actually have what you thought you had.
How about that? Very clever of them, huh?
Well, we outsmarted them.
Well, good. What now? You mentioned sole leather. So we go from terminology that involves the description of the source of the leather from the hide
Right.
to end purpose of the leather,
Right.
right? So sole leather is what?
Shoe sole leather. So this was originally developed to be durable enough to be worn on the bottom of your foot. You walk around on it all day on whatever, and it's going to hold up.
And it's top grain usually, right?
It's top grain. All shoe sole leather is going to be top grain. You can't make it out of a split.
Right.
And what makes it sole leather then is the tanning process that happens after we split this into the 3 layers and do any other pre-processes to it.
Right.
Sole bend in particular goes through a process after
Sole
it's,
bend, is that another? It's synonymous with the.
it ends up being used interchangeably because typically the cut of the hide that the sole leather is made from is the bend. So people.
And where's the bend?
The bend runs down the back of the
right.
animal. Yeah,
Right. You mentioned that.
Yeah, right along the spine.
Up high,
Up high.
down the flank, toward
Yeah.
the posterior of the animal.
Right.
That's called the bend.
Yes.
Okay.
And that term just ends up being used interchangeably when you hear shoe sole leather, sole bend.
Okay.
People say that.
All right.
You can make sole leather out of a shoulder. It's just people tend not to do it
Right.
for whatever reason.
It's probably too thick.
It could be.
It could be too thick, and I guess if it's got to have some. Sole leather must have some degree of flexibility, or you couldn't walk into things.
Yeah. And that's another part of the tanning process where they make this in different tempers. They make firm, they make semi-flexible, they make flexible. So for this guy, just part of the process that makes it shoe sole leather is the compression that they do to it after it's tanned. So where the fibers were already extremely densely packed, they're now even more so.
How do they do that?
So they'll run it through some rollers that compress the material, or
So
they'll
it's
put
actually
it in a giant
it's
press.
actually mashed
It's mashed
flatter,
together. Yeah.
right?
And
right.
and they'll
That's
pack
interesting.
they'll pack
and it
oils
stays
and-
mashed.
Yeah.
You can make it denser with the pressure. Is that right?
That's one of the properties of leather that is vegetable tanned, which sole bend is that it will take a set. So if you stamp it or something like that, it will be permanent. Or if you just compress the whole thing, as far as you can compress it, it'll
Right.
hold that set.
So temper refers to the flexibility of the finished leather,
Correct. Yes.
and it comes in 3 or 4 different grades.
Yeah,
You mentioned-
firm, semi-flexible, and flexible are the ones I've seen. Depending
What is
on this is semi-flexible.
Semi-flexible.
Yeah.
Why don't you use flexible?
I think it would be too flexible. The one thing about especially this belt, the single ply, there's nothing to protect this piece of leather from breaking down at all. So I think going with something that is going to have a more dense fiber structure from the beginning would be better for this belt than to go, because
in terms of lifespan.
Yes, because yes, it is more flexible, but that's also going to give rise to other properties. It's not just more flexible, but the same strength and tension. It's going to be weaker in tension as well.
Yeah, I guess you give up one for the other.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, there's no free lunch there. So after trying them, the semi-flexible has just turned out to seems to be the best one for what we're doing.
Okay. Sole leather is an example of a type of a term for the end use of the product. What are some other examples of that?
As far as the tanning process?
No, as far as the this is for soles.
It's for shoe soles.
Would you have luggage leather? Would you have
sure
vamp leather for the top part of the shoe?
Yeah, you can make whatever type of leather you want. There's a lot of them are named for different parts of like saddlery that they'd be used for. So you have skirting leather, you've got harness leather, you've got, like you were saying, there's a upholstery leather, there's suede. Yeah, tooling leather. Tooling leather really just refers to any type of vegetable tan leather that can be
embossed
can be embossed or carved.
Right. This is, and you'd mentioned earlier, vegetable tan. How many different tanning processes are commonly employed, and what are the terms for those?
There's two major ones. The vegetable tanning is the oldest. It probably came about the first time humans killed an animal and then started trying to figure out what to do with the skin. They probably came across it, by accident, the fact that you could soak this in tree bark tannins and some other salts and have it be cured into something that doesn't become rawhide. It stays flexible, but it also doesn't rot.
Right.
So vegetable tanning now just refers to
rawhide. Let's explain.
Rawhide would just be if you took the hide off the animal and let it dry. Just let all the moisture dry out of it.
You took it off, scraped all the hair off of it, scraped all the flesh off of it, and it looks like it's flinty. It looks like parchment, semi-transparent, so it's translucent, and if it's not too thick, right, and it's absolutely rigid, doesn't give at all. And you've heard the term. You people have heard the term rawhide. Rawhide is not leather. Rawhide is not leather. Rawhide can't be used for leather, and it's not. I guess probably one of the commercial purposes of rawhide would be for lacing other things, right? Do they still lace things with rawhide or what?
They make dog bones out of it.
Oh yeah, well, food items.
Yeah,
those aren't nearly as good for your dog as just raw bones. You guys are giving your dogs pieces of rawhide. You'll notice they soften up and get kind of snot-like after the dog messes with them for 5 or 10 minutes. That's not just give the dog a bone, okay? Raw bones.
Yeah. So the vegetable tanning currently refers to a tanning process that uses plant matter for the tanning. Bark tannins was the most common. Now I think they've incorporated some other stuff because it's not practical to use bark tannin for everything.
No, I'm sure they've got synthetically produced tannins and other things. I have used the old alum tanning method for curing hides myself.
Yeah.
Back when I used to mess around with stuff like that. I tanned stuff myself with the old alum, which is aluminum sulfate and sodium chloride solution. You just take warm water and put as much salt in it, table salt in it, and just stir it up and dissolve as much of it into the solution as you can. And then you put alum in it, and these are ground products, and that'll also go into solution. And as much solution as it'll hold in the warm water, you stir into it, and then when it cools off, some of it will crystallize out, precipitate out onto the bottom of the vessel. But then you take a fleshed hide with the fur on it, and put it in there and leave it for 2 weeks. Make sure it stays submerged in the thing. Pull it out. After 2 weeks, it's tanned. It's tanned leather.
Will the hair follicles just scrape off after?
No, the hair sets the hair.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to make a pelt, you want to preserve a pelt, and that's how some version of that is how they'll do a fur.
Okay.
Right, but that's how I've done it. It's easy to do. It's easy to make a homemade version of this tanning brine, and it works like that. I would imagine that commercial furs are prepared with a similar, probably a lot more efficient way to do it than that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they have faster ways to do it, but that's probably not the equivalent of a vegetable tan product.
No.
I don't know how the two would compare. I think the whole purpose of the whole process, though, is to cross-link the proteins in the skin so that they're permanently stuck together. It's not oxidation, I don't guess, but it's a...
Yeah, and also to remove the moisture and to replace it with something else. These will get packed in with oils and waxes, and sole leather actually gets some clay added into it as well.
Really? What does that do?
It helps it to just be more firm, more durable.
Right.
Scuff,
resist scuff, that sort of thing.
Yeah, something that you're going to be walking around on rocks or whatever surface you might walk on. It helps it hold up.
Yeah, leather wears out eventually, doesn't it? That's the problem with. I used to wear leather-soled boots all the time, but you get tired of having to resole them all the time. So the neoprene is what I go with now. So what's the other process that's predominant in the leather making industry?
Yeah, so the two big commercial ones are the veg tan and chrome tanning.
Right.
So instead of using organic matter to do the tanning, they use chromium salts, and it's actually the most common method of tanning now. I've read that over 80% of all leather that's tanned uses chrome tanning at this point.
So chromium salts, well, that's probably similar to my alum and table salt method.
Yeah.
Probably does about the same thing.
The difference with them is they would go through a liming process before that to remove all the hair and everything before tanning. It wouldn't be for making pelts or anything.
Right.
So yeah, those are the big two, the veg tan and the chrome tanning. The reason I think that chrome tanning has caught on the way it has is because it's so much quicker.
Oh, really? How long does it take the two processes in comparison?
So the vegetable tanning, this is going to go into a tanning liquor in a large vat for 6 weeks, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And they have to be checked the whole time. They got to pull it out, make sure that the tanning liquor is evenly contacting all the skins and everything. And the chrome tanning, they put this in a drum, they spin it, and it only takes 2 to 3 days. So it's a much faster process.
So it stays in the drum spinning for 2 to 3 days?
Yes.
In motion?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that ensures uniform exposure to the tanning product, right?
Right.
But 2 to 3 days, yeah, that's why vodka is cheaper than bourbon. Time is money.
Yeah.
Right?
I was thinking about some of the different vegetable tanning processes in terms of how similar it is or how analogous it is almost to making whiskey. Whereas whiskey, you start with the same raw material every time, this barley malt. And then through your own secret recipe, you can come up with something that is wildly different in the end, and also depending on how it's aged and all those different things. So it seems to be very similar with tanning leather. I've tried to read everything I could find about it. The only thing you could do more would be to just go start visiting tanneries and seeing their process.
Right.
Just
if they would even let you in.
If they would let you, because there's probably a lot of there's probably so much tribal knowledge that they have,
sure.
and
people have been making leather for a hell of a long time. Been making leather as long as they've been making weapons. So it's one of the oldest manufacturing industries in the human experience.
Yep.
What is all right? So oil tanned. I'm familiar with that term. Where does that fit into this?
Oil tanned? I'm not sure that wouldn't just be a veg tan product that then goes through a milling process afterwards. So what they'll do after they have tanned the leather, so it's been cured, they'll put it in a mill, which is another large drum. They'll throw in oil and waxes and different things like that, and then they'll roll it for several hours up to several days, depending on what temper and hand feel they're trying to accomplish with the leather.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's what oil tanning would be.
Right. So it's really not formally a different tanning process.
No, I don't believe
it's a finishing process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like that older belt I've got that I handed you, that was sold at the time as a product called harness leather.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Harness leather, they actually take beef tallow and they pack it in by hand.
Really?
Yeah. And then apparently the hide gets so waxy and so full of fat that it won't even feed through the industrial machines they have that are supposed to squeeze excess back out.
Wow.
So I've watched videos of some poor guy with a hand tool going over hides by hand to squeeze out the excess beef tallow.
And that is obviously a preservation process, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to use a piece of leather in real horrible conditions, like on the back of a horse,
right,
where it's wet and sweaty and salt and scuff and all this other stuff.
Yeah, it's a natural product, beef tallow, so it's not going to harm the skin of the animal that's wearing it. It also makes it somewhat waterproof, so you don't have to just ride in the sunshine.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep.
So pretty much all of the material that you deal with is vegetable tan, and the 1-ply belt that you see right here is just one thickness. And how do you order it this thick, or do you skive it down to this thickness when you're preparing it?
We ordered in that thickness.
And this is what?
That is
6 or 7 millimeters.
Yeah, it's about that. They weigh it out in ounces. It's just an old way of measuring the thickness of leather. So they'd call that 15, 17 ounce. It could be anywhere from 15 to 17 ounces.
Per 15, 17 ounces per length or per square inch? Square foot?
It'd be the whole hide. So the hide, after it had gone through its tanning processes, they'll run it through a splitter or a leveler that'll take the entire hide down to a single thickness. And an ounce is just a 64th of an inch. So it's between 15 and 17 64ths of an inch, which it's easier to think in millimeters at that point.
It really is.
Yeah. 6 or 7 millimeters.
So there's an archaic measuring.
Yeah, there's another one called irons that.
I've heard that referred to when we're talking about harness leather. 7 iron.
Yeah.
Like if you're buying stirrup leathers for your English saddle, that'll come in iron. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's also a term for the thickness.
Yeah, and right. I'd have to look up the conversion because it doesn't ever come up with what we're doing. But yeah, it would map straight to a certain thickness. 1 iron would equal whatever.
So this is just so you buy this. This comes in off the truck, this thick, ready to use.
Yes,
and then you'll cut it.
Yeah,
and in the case of this 1-ply, it's a fairly simple manufacturing process. You're going to have to skive down the buckle bend,
right
there. And how much do you take off of that? That looks like that's down to about 4.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You take about half of the thickness, a little less than half the thickness off of that, so that it'll bend around the buckle. Cut the slot, and I'm talking about this thickness right here. Then they cut the slot for the pin of the buckle, and then assemble it with these good rivets, right? And this is called the keeper. This is the belt keeper. Is that what y'all call it too?
Keeper or loop.
This is traditionally called the keeper. This thing right here, and looks like not quite exactly the same. No, it's the same thickness as the rest of the belt. And I'm beating my microphone up here. I know. And then you rivet these things together. Now tell us about these good rivets, because these are high quality rivets that, and I've already talked about the little skinny ones that come apart real easily. These things are lifetime installations, right?
Yeah.
Now I've used them myself, and I've got several belts that are assembled with what are called Chicago screws, which are if you got one with a Chicago screw, those are the old rivets there, right? Chicago screws kind of look like this, but they're actually a threaded device with a flat surface area on one side and then usually a flathead screw on the other side, and it threads into a female side, and it just sucks the leather together like that, and it's a nice method of assembly. Why do you not use Chicago screws in favor of this type of rivet, and what's this called?
Well, a screw can come undone,
Right.
for one thing, so you've added a liability there. And really, you'd never have to take this area apart. You know, if you needed to change the buckle or something like that for some reason, these can be drilled out. But that's the only way that it would come apart. I just don't see any reason to have screws there and
Right.
have to worry about your belt coming apart on you.
Sure. And honestly, I've seen Chicago screws on dress belts more frequently
Okay,
because you might want to change the buckle out on a dress belt.
that makes sense. Okay.
Right.
These are called two-piece mate rivets. So one piece
Mate rivets.
mate rivets. There's
M-A-T-E.
M-A-T-E. There's a male and a female side. The male side functions the same way that a normal pop rivet does.
Right.
So it's got a mandrel with a shank going through it. When you pull that shank out, the mandrel collapses down, expands outward. And in a pop rivet, if you just had two pieces of metal that you were trying to rivet together, when that piece that you're pulling through expands out, it pulls those two pieces of metal together, and then they can never come apart. Now, that doesn't really work for leather because, metal is not going to deform when that tries to pull through, whereas leather can. So these, you just put a cap on top of that pop rivet, so when you pull it, it expands into the cap, and now you've got two pieces that are permanently joined together. And that's the two-piece mate rivet. And it's made for industrial applications. Like we could look up, a shear and a tensile rating, for these guys. Which
Are they aluminum?
They're aluminum. Yeah.
Right. So they don't corrode.
They don't corrode.
Rust. Don't make a pretty green patina around the rivet like rivets and burrs do.
Yeah.
But these things they're a damn secure fastening method. And then for this single ply, we're basically done with it. Now,
there's one other thing I'd point out in that area.
Okay,
That's not.
I've got a question in a second about both of these. It's been on my mind for quite some time. Watch your microphone there, Blake.
So, like in this area right here, it's important to punch these holes such that when you feed the keeper through and put this together, you don't end up with a giant bulge. You don't end up with a giant bulge.
I see what you're doing.
On the bottom side of the belt.
So this side's going to be longer than that dimension between those two punches is longer than this one, right?
Right. And you do that because this is what's going to be digging into your stomach, and you want the least amount of extra material right there as possible. And that was one of the example belts that I was going to show you. This is one of the samples we got.
Yeah,
when
you
were
can
first
clearly see the
belts.
problem.
Yeah,
right.
They obviously weren't even thinking about this at all. So that's just one of the little details that we tried to think about and incorporate that into the design of these belts.
So I guess that dimension is going to vary with the thickness of the leather.
It doesn't.
A little bit. Or not. Have you got a formula down for this now? I guess you do.
Yeah, and we've got one single die made that punches out all 8 holes plus the slot all at the same time.
And then you just skive that down and it assembles in that shape.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and theoretically it probably ought to vary a little bit with the thickness of the leather, but it doesn't vary enough that it's worth having a whole new set of dies made.
This die was used for this and that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. That's interesting. Now, here's the question that I've got. I've messed around with leather for years and years. How do you get these damn things so nice and straight. How do you get the cut straight? How do you make these edges perfectly uniform? How does this thing end up looking like an absolute, ruler? How do you do that?
That's the secret.
We're asking.
We right now we actually have our supplier strap cut these for us. So we'll order however many hides, and they'll run it through this giant machine with rotating cutting wheels on it. Mm-hmm. We've actually got one at our shop, and we have used it, but right now it's actually more economical in terms of time to have them go ahead and cut it for us.
Do they cut it to length, or do you just get a hide length piece of?
It comes out and it'll have jagged edges on each end, and it'll just be whatever length the hide was.
Right.
And they do pretty good. They'll start out and cut a straight edge down one edge, and then they'll have a guide that they feed it through. And then we've got a fixture at our shop. If we get them in and there's any more than a half inch of bend in one, we'll case it. So we'll soak it in water, and we'll hammer it down into this fixture that is exactly 3 inches wide, leave it overnight and let it dry. Once it comes out of that, it's more or less perfectly straight.
Right.
So we can straighten them if they don't start out that way.
Right. So basically these come in pre-cut as blanks. I would imagine what they do is they cut these under pressure, and then the straight edge, makes a nice straight cut so that it doesn't deviate according to the pressure of the blade going through the leather. If it's not, you probably have to hold it down, right?
Yeah.
Under a lot of pressure to do that, right?
Well, the cutter will cut multiple straps at a time, so that.
Oh, you've seen it. You've seen it done.
We've got one at our shop.
Oh, that will do the same multi-layer. Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah, we can cut. I think it's 8 3-inch straps at one time, and so at that point you're almost the whole width of the hide. Mm-hmm. If you're strap cutting that many at once. So you don't really have a problem with the work trying to turn on you based on that, because you've got so many cutters going into it at once.
Right. And you're stabilizing the one adjacent to the...
Right. And those cutters are just bearing down on a plastic roller that's underneath that. Mm-hmm. So there's not really anything to do other than just feed it in through as straight as you possibly can.
Right.
But yeah, once
have you ever bought a side... a whole side of top grain?
Yeah, we've
That's
bought
how it comes in, and is that uniform in thickness when you get it?
Yeah, more or less. It's supposed to be within that 15, 17 ounce, whatever that is, a couple 64ths of an inch.
The thing may be this big and 9 feet long.
Right.
That sort of thing.
And, not to say we don't ever get stuff in that's obviously too thin or too thick or something like that. And we can split it down. If it's too thick, if it's too thin, make a deadlift jack out of it.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay. That's the cutting process that I was concerned with. Now,
yes,
you've
about
got
the edges
4
too.
perfectly uniform. Yeah, let's talk about the edges first. These look like they've been sanded. Is that correct? Is it a sanding process, or is it a?
These have been on the double ply. When you glue these 2 layers together, it's impossible to get them to line up exactly perfect.
Right.
So we'll just come back with a drum sander and go down both edges.
But it still remains perfectly straight. How did you do that?
Well, usually it's off just in one direction. A lot of times what will happen is maybe one strap is just ever so slightly thicker than the other one. So when you're gluing it together, you want to make sure that you align that one side perfectly, leave all your mismatch on the other side.
So you only have to do one side corrected for
you've only got to correct the unevenness on one side, and then you may have a little bit of a rough edge where you got a little glue squeeze out or something like that.
Right.
Plus you want it to look the same, so you just go ahead and sand the other side too.
Right.
And then there are tools called edge bevelers. Just little hand tools that we run down the edge to round it over, so you don't have a sharp edge.
Right, I've seen those.
Yeah.
Looks like a little curvy thing with a blade on it.
Right.
How do you sew? The stitching on these things is absolutely beautiful and uniform. What kind of machine do you use for that?
We've got a couple of union lock stitch machines. So a normal sewing machine is just going to have a single needle. It just punches up and down, and a presser foot feeds the work. To sew this material in this thickness, we use something called a needle and awl sewing machine. So instead of a needle coming down and punching into the work, there's an awl there. And its only job is to come down, punch the hole.
An awl is a tool that just
Right.
looks like an ice pick, like
Right.
a short ice pick. It's thicker than a needle.
It is. It's always
It's
a
not-
gauge thicker.
Right,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have a hole for the thread. It just
Right.
punches a hole.
Right. And then on our machine, the needle is then fed up through the bottom, through the hole that the awl just punched. And you've got a mechanism that'll actually loop the string, the thread, around the needle. The needle doesn't have a hole through it. It's just got a barb. So you're hooking it through there, and then the needle descends back down. And the two machines we've got, it's hard to tell exactly how old your particular machine is. The patent for them was in the early 1900s. That was when this machine was designed. And we think ours are probably from the 1920s, the original castings.
Where did you get them?
A company called Campbell Randall. They're in Texas.
This thread is what? It's very stout.
Yeah, it's a synthetic. It's a polyester thread.
Would this be the same kind of thread that shoes are assembled with?
Yeah, it would be.
Right.
Most likely.
Okay.
Most thread today is polyester. Cotton thread will just fray over time.
It probably rots too.
Yeah, the polyester just holds up a lot better, and
Right.
it sews better, especially in these really heavy-duty machines. If you tried to run just any thread through them, you're just going to keep breaking thread.
Right.
And so
And what glue is used?
we use a contact cement. So you'll take
Contact cement's wonderful stuff, isn't it?
yeah. It's weird stuff if you hadn't used it before, because
I use
to,
it all the time,
Yeah.
man. It's been around for 100 years, I guess. And hell, I remember my dad using it, 50 years ago. He didn't really know how, but contact cement's interesting stuff. It really is. You paint both sides of the leather with it and let it dry. And
let it dry completely.
let it dry completely, and which can take at least 20 minutes. But if you let this stuff sit overnight, it's fine. And then once it's thoroughly dry, you put the two sides together, and they're not they're not coming apart.
Yeah.
It's a permanent assembly, and contact cement is really amazing stuff. So those of you whose running shoes are continually coming apart, what you do is like the sole comes off, usually at the toe, pull it apart, go ahead and break it apart a little bit more, take some contact cement, and they sell it in small bottles, and there'll be a little swab inside the bottle that you can paint both sides of it on there with. Paint it, pry the thing open with a little toothpick or a match or something like that so that it will dry, not in contact, and leave it apart 20 minutes. Take the match out, put the thing back together, and it's fixed. It won't come apart. You can repair it. Don't just throw your shoes away because they start to separate, because they're easy to fix with contact cement. And you guys are using just plain old contact cement, right?
Yep. It's kind of nasty stuff. It's our least favorite day in the shop, because you got to put on a mask and everything. The amount we're using.
I think the solvent is MEK, isn't it? Or some
it's
high
either-
volatile acetone,
and we have to thin it down to get it to spread. So we've got even more of that solvent in the air due to the thinner we're using. So
have you got exhaust fans and stuff to try to keep the building from exploding? Or
we've got fans and everything that we set up. We probably should have a little bit more in the way of like a vent hood or something like that long term. But it's working for right now, the lower volumes that we're doing. Just keep that mask on.
And how do you punch the holes?
That's a separate die. So for our 3-inch belts, we've got the die that does the buckle end, and we've got the die that does the billet end. So there's a die that sits on here. It's the longest die that our press will accept, but it cuts out this end shape and all 11 holes at the same time.
Right. So this is an 11-hole belt. So when you order the belt from Dominion, you're going to be ordering your waist size to the middle hole. All right. So when you order a 38, that's 38. This thing right here is 38. And then if you lose weight, you gain weight, you're fine.
Right.
It allows you quite a bit of flexibility in terms of the sizing of the belt. And that hole looks like about a 7/16. What is that thing? It's a nice fat one.
It's a 5/16, but it's got a little bit of taper to it, so it's going to look bigger on this side than it actually is on the back side where you feed the prong through.
I had a cheap belt several years ago, and I think it was a combination of the leather not being quite the consistency it should have been. It might have been a split. Might have been made out of a split or 2 layers of split or something like that, and too thin a buckle pin.
Right.
And it cut.
Right.
It actually cut all the way through. Right. What do you think the problem was?
Stress is force divided by area, so the bearing stress on one of these holes as that pin gets smaller and smaller is going to go up and up.
Right.
Till eventually you've got a knife edge basically trying to pull through there.
You've got a cheese wire, don't you?
Yeah.
So if you guys have calculated the size of the hole, the curve that size makes, and the size of the buckle pin, and these don't tear.
They don't. We've never had anyone, that they might ovalize slightly to begin with,
and
that's
deal
because
with that as long as it's not cutting through the punch.
Yeah, and that's just due to the fact that the hole is punched vertically, the prong is trying to go through at an angle, so it's going to deform slightly on the top and bottom, but it should stabilize.
Have you ever thought about angling the holes toward the buckle pin?
I talked to you about that the first time I met you.
Right. I do remember that. What did you decide about that?
Well, we're still trying to figure out logistically how you would do that in volumes.
Well, you'd have to. So when you take this die, is it a stamp?
It is
a straight vertical stamp.
Vertical stamp.
So it'd be, that would be kind of a problem. You'd almost have to come in and create each hole with a separate process.
You'd probably need a stamp that was guided by linear guides on an angle, so that when you put it in the press, it actually slid down and came back up. But it would be an engineering feat to design and build something.
Nobody
like that.
does that, right?
Not that I know of. You can punch holes by hand. You can set this on a wedge and get your punch just right, and you can tap them through. But you can't really do that consistently enough to make the belts like we're.
To do it each one by hand. They're going to be all over the belt. And last, how do you do the starting strength logo on the tongue down here?
We've got a brass embossing stamp that we had made from the artwork file that you guys gave us. And we've got just an ink pad, similar to what you would use a rubber stamp with. So we'll put the dye that's the color we need on the pad, get just enough of it on there so you can put the stamp in it. We've got a fixture that holds this belt just so and guides the stamp so that it's consistent every time. And then we'll put it in a press and just lightly hit it. So it just very slightly embosses that into it. And
it's a nice clean stamp.
Yeah,
it's in the leather. It's embossed in the leather, and the ink is not running around. It's a real nice looking, clean job.
It's a very high stress thing to do though, because usually the belt's completed at that point, and the only thing left to do is screw up the stamp.
This thing. Right.
So,
right.
But Katie does a good job on that.
Well, now here's another real important question. One of the hallmarks of a cheap belt is a cheap buckle. A cheap roller buckle with a split roller.
Right.
Those damn things are a maintenance problem. I have a bunch of belts in my gym. You guys that have been in the gym understand that I've got lots and lots of belts in the gym. And we have them in there for everybody to use. And we've had some of them in there for 20, 25 years. And one of the things that always happens to a cheap split roller is it will start to flare out.
Right.
At the end of the roller, it'll flare out around the
right at the edges usually.
The bend of the buckle.
Yeah.
And it will start to come apart right at the split, and will make a nice little pointy thing for you to slice your thumb open on.
Not to mention scratch your belt.
And scratch your belt up and, in your gym bag, pokes holes in your shirts and stuff like that. So these things are a solid roller. Where do you get these?
Those come from the same people that supply our leather. It's a company called Weaver Leather in Ohio. They're a leather distributor. They're not a tannery, but they bring in leather and they sell us everything we need as far as that goes.
And where do they get these things? It's interesting that they know they need a solid roller. These are it's a 3-inch solid roller buckle hard to find. I wonder if they probably decided.
It was in the beginning.
I bet.
They have a supplier that makes them for them. It's an overseas supplier that makes them for them. They made a 4-inch roller, and it took a lot of convincing to get them to carry a 3-inch version. In the beginning, we just had to make these massive orders because they would do it all at one time. It had a 5-month lead time coming from overseas, so you'd have to order a year's supply of buckles just about at a time. We finally convinced them that people are coming around to the 3-inch belt and that they're going to have lots and lots of business selling these things. So they're finally coming around they're going to stock them as a stock item.
Good.
And we don't have to have pallets and pallets of buckles sitting in the shop.
Another thing about the buckle that is important is the slot cut in the bend here. There is nothing more annoying than a company that cuts that slot too wide so that the pin wiggles too much back and forth and makes it hard for you to find the hole when you're trying to tighten your belt right before you go into the bar. Nothing is more irritating than that. And the width of that slot is important in terms of your being able to use the belt quickly and efficiently. So how do you determine how wide the slot's going to be? I guess at this point your die. Was there a lot of trial and error on that, or
there was cutting them out with an X-Acto knife and just making a bunch of samples. Measuring exactly what you did and putting the thing together, because the other thing you can do is get it slightly too tight, and that's really bad too, because you can bind that up completely by it being just a little bit too tight. So it's a fine line between having it be unusable either because it's too loose or too tight.
Right.
Yeah.
No, these are just exactly right. I've never had one that was too tight, but I can assume it just wouldn't. It has to flop quickly, right? And if it was too tight, it would probably quickly wear out to the point where it would. Oh, here's
that's one that's
here's
too tight.
A sample. Oh yeah.
Through the middle, it's not so bad, but at the extents, it's.
You know why this one's too tight? They didn't cut the slot long enough.
Yeah. It rotates around. It's hitting just the edge of the slot.
It rams into the edge of the slot right there.
And this is what you can expect if you just go on Amazon and order the random $30 belt.
Yeah, this is a piece of Chinese junk, apparently.
At least that one is. At least that one is made out of the top grain leather.
See the underside of the keeper. See exactly what Blake was talking about earlier. Look what they did at the top. It works fine at the top, but the side that lays against you this is upside down basically.
Yeah, and this is the one that was made out of the split leather, where I had to cut into it to find that out because they painted the edges, and then
they did.
You probably can't see it on the camera, but inside the buckle area, they painted it brown, or they dyed it brown somehow, so you would think you were getting a top grain leather, but really you weren't, and you wouldn't know any better unless you cut into it, or you just tore through it eventually.
How about that?
And
that's 2-ply, isn't it?
I think it's 2 plies of split leather.
It looks
just
exactly. You can't see that on the camera, but this is 2 plies of split leather.
And then you
you stick your thumbnail right down in there and pry it open. That is 2 plies of split.
And then you can see, I've done videos before where I take a screwdriver and just pop these rivets off that they have on here. These are decorative rivets. It's not something that belongs on a weightlifting belt. And then one of the last ones that I saw was this guy. It's important that keeper be sized correctly, or you end up with this situation where you buckle the belt
And now you can't get
it won't physically go in the keeper. So
and the keeper can't be too close to the bend
right
for the buckle either. It's got to be far enough back down the belt to where it actually functions.
It's got to be far enough back from here, and it's got to be tall enough so that's
there's
not
got to be enough
unmanageable.
slop in the thing to allow you to put it on quickly. Right. Oh, but look at this. This one is made of genuine leather.
That's code for split leather.
But it's genuine leather. See the picture of our friend the cow? Yes, genuine leather.
So you're dealing with a lot of companies out there that are obviously not even trying their belt on to make sure that it works.
They're not lifters.
No.
They've never used the product. They don't care.
Right.
They made an order of 10,000 from a factory in rural China.
Or Pakistan.
Or India.
Right.
Or Oklahoma. We're just, primitive conditions.
Yeah. And I should say, too, it's not that it can't be done, because that's, after all, what I did in the beginning was have one sourced. But, man, you've really got to stay on top of them, because they'll send you a couple of samples that are perfectly fine. You've got some in your gym.
1,000 belts get here, and they're all wrong, and what the hell are you going to do with them?
Well, and that's exactly what happened to us.
I'm sure.
Year 2 into this, we got 1,000 belts in right before Christmas time. It was right at Thanksgiving? Yeah. And every single one of them had rust on the buckles when we got it in. So we spent
rust on the buckles?
Every one of them.
What were the buckles made of?
Well, it was a plated steel, but it was obviously an inferior plating process.
Apparently.
And they came over, they slow boated them over, and after sitting in all that humid, salty air and not being sealed up correctly, we had 1,000 belts at Christmas time that we couldn't sell the first one.
Oh God! Oh,
and so,
what did you do with them?
Well, we got them sending us buckles. We also found some people that were willing to sell us some of their buckles that they had in stock. And we drilled out all the rivets, took every single belt apart, and put new hardware on it.
That really sounds like a lot of fun.
It sucked. It really sucked.
And you don't make any money on the whole deal.
No, and
you get it.
And that was
to do that much stuff to it to fix it up so they're actually available for sale.
And even then, they had other problems with them too. As we're taking them apart, you're seeing all the other shortcuts that are being taken. As you dig into it. So even with replacing the hardware, we might find something else about the belt that wasn't something we could fix at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of the last straw with those guys. It just sourcing that kind of thing overseas, unless you're willing to go over there and manage it on the ground, it looked to me like it was unmanageable.
Well, and this is one of the reasons why we print all of our books in the United States up in Michigan. If we and the guys we use are great. They have never sent us a shipment of books with an upside down signature. Nothing has ever been wrong with these guys. It's DRC in Michigan, Data Reproductions Corporation in Michigan, just to brag on them. They do a great job. But we could save a whole bunch of money on our unit cost by having all this done in China.
Yeah, in theory.
In theory. In practice, I'd rather spend the extra $1.
Right.
Because if we had to send a load of books back, that'd be a giant nightmare if they would even take them back. And if we got a, order in of 10,000 books, anytime we'd place an order like that, we are at the end of the previous inventory, and we need them now.
Right.
And they came in and they're defective. If I've got to send them back, I'd much rather send them back to Michigan than to communist China. So we've always stayed domestic. So you guys are doing all of this stuff is made in the United States, right?
Yep.
Except for the buckle.
Except for the buckle. And, probably the rivets too. I mean, just about anything you buy today that's made out of metal that metal's going to be sourced overseas. And it's one of those things. You try to do the best you can. How far down the rabbit hole do you go with the Made in America thing? Your hand tools, some of those are not going to be made in America. Any power tools you have, so you do the best you can.
Well, and you do what's necessary for the quality of the product. If you can find a quality roller buckle that's made in China, then why worry too much about it? But if you know it's a part that you can't get the quality in that you want, you better go ahead and source it where you know the thing is going to not cost you a bunch of time and money to replace it if it comes in and fails.
Right. And it's not that, U.S. manufacturers never screw up. It's not that we've never screwed up, but people know where we live.
Right.
There's somebody you can strangle.
It's easier to come beat you up than it would be to go to communist China and beat the guy.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they're over there, you're over here. If they say buzz off, what are you really going to do?
The Pacific Ocean makes it stick,
Yeah.
So what we end up with, though, is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best belt in the industry if you are looking for a natural leather belt. I'm not going to poor mouth my buddy Dean Best. Dean makes a great product, and I know he makes a great product. But we had these things made like this for a very particular reason. I don't like a suede belt nearly as well as I like a plain leather belt. I don't like the way it feels. I don't like the way it ages. Suede is not as durable long term as this belt. You'll buy this belt, and if you don't gain weight or lose weight out of it, you will use this the rest of your life. It is a lifetime investment. I'm sorry about the no repeat business, but maybe the guy will tell his brother-in-law about it, and he'll buy one from you too, because you buy this belt one time, it lasts the rest of your life.
Or like you said, people tend to either blow up or shrink, so maybe they'll need another one.
It's what people do, People will. In fact, if you buy the thing correctly and size for the middle hole, you're quite likely to just buy one belt. And I know $175 for this quality product sounds like a hell of a lot of money. If you don't want a quality belt, don't buy one. Go on Amazon and get a cheap piece of junk. Be my guest. But if you're serious about your training, this starting strength belt or this starting strength belt is what you want. I think you ought to have one of each, and I'll tell you the reason for that. When I bench press, when I press, I like the way the single ply feels better. And I can't really even tell you why I like it that way, but it feels better to me when I'm doing especially when I'm doing a bench press.
You're not laying on it?
No, I can get this real tight.
Okay.
This thing tightens quickly.
Yeah.
And when you're laying down on a bench, you're going to be one hole tighter than your squat or your deadlift adjustment. This thing goes on quickly and easily, and I can lay back against this thing and tighten it way down. I can get this one tighter than I can get this one. So me being wealthy and powerful, I've got one of each, and I use both of them all the time. And I advise you to do the same thing. This is $175. This is
$90.
$90.
Right.
The orders are filled quickly and efficiently, and these things for this type of belt, this is the best belt in the world. And Blake intends to keep it that way. If you've got any feedback about your belt for him, contact him at dominionstrength.com.
Yep, dominionstrength.com. You can email us team at dominionstrength.com, Instagram at dominionstg, and Dominion Strength Training on Facebook. You can get in touch with us anyway.
You can get in touch with him off of our website, startingstrength.com. You look under the equipment tab, and the link to their website is there. Thanks for coming to visit. Enjoyed it.
Thanks
Blake.
for having me.
And it's been enlightening, educational. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk about leather. And we appreciate you being here for Starting Strength Radio. We'll see you next time.